Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for what is our 6th town hall. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. We're delighted to have you and wish we could say hello in person. If you've been here before, welcome back warmly to our virtual community. Who really thought we would still be doing meetings this way in July? But we really continue to appreciate your desire to learn more about the work of Philabundance, and today especially in this presentation, how we can have an even greater impact through really productive relationships. And these partnerships make our dollars, which come from you, go even farther and are a key ingredient to our success. So I'd love to introduce today's speakers to you. I am really thrilled and honored to have the responsibility of introducing you to our new CEO, Loree D. She'll share a little more about why she wanted to be here at Philabundance and her vision for us in a minute, but here's some brief background that won't even begin to do her resume justice. Immediately prior to joining us on just June 2nd, Loree was the Chief of Staff at Rutgers University Camden, but her career encompasses leadership positions in nonprofit organizations, education, and city government, and includes roles with the School District of Philadelphia and as Managing Director for the City of Philadelphia. She also served as the Director of City Year of Greater Philadelphia and as Director of the African Studies Association, which is the largest scholarly association for the study of Africa in the world. In her spare time, she serves on a variety of boards, and these currently include Health Partners Plans, the Philadelphia Health Partnership, the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, and the Independence Foundation. She is a member of the United Negro College Fund's Philadelphia Leadership Council, and the Hope Center for College, Community, and Justice Advisory Board. She is also an Eisenhower Fellow. Among her many, many distinctions, Loree was the first recipient of the Urban League of Philadelphia's Whitney M. Young Jr. Young Leader Award, was listed as one of the 10 people under 40 to watch by the Philadelphia Tribune magazine, and was twice recognized by Leadership Philadelphia as a connector, one who connects for the common good. Loree holds a BA in history from Spelman College and also a master's in history from Princeton University. She has dedicated herself to service, and we're really privileged to have her lead all of us at Philabundance. Our next speaker today is Cynthia Figueroa, who is the Deputy Mayor, as you can see, of the Office of Children and Families for the City of Philadelphia. This is a newly created office which works across city departments to ensure that all the policies, resources, and services for children and families are aligned and coordinated, and the office works in partnership with the school district as well. She also oversees the expansion of the city's pre-K and community school programs, and is establishing a Children and Families Cabinet of city leaders from different departments to improve the coordination of services that impact Philadelphia families. Prior to her appointment as Deputy Mayor, Cynthia was the Commissioner of the Philadelphia Department of Human Services and has really devoted her career to helping improve the lives of vulnerable children and families. And she too has a deep history of service, having previously been the President and CEO of Congreso de Latinos Unidos, the Deputy Commissioner for DHS, and the Executive Director of Women Against Abuse. She is also an Eisenhower Fellow, and she has received the Ricard Salinas Scholarship of the Aspen Institute, the University of Pennsylvania Outstanding Leadership Award, the National Football League Philadelphia Eagles Hispanic Heritage Leadership Award, and the prestigious Peter B. Goldberg Aramark Building Community Executive Leadership Award. In addition, she was received an award from the Hispanic Bar Association for her efforts. She currently serves on the USA Board of Trustees for the United Way and is also a member of the board of the Philadelphia Zoo. And she was recently appointed by Governor Wolf to serve on the statewide juvenile task force. This is a very impressive group of women. As I go down the list, Kate Houstoun is also joining us, and we're delighted to have her as well. She is the Managing Director for Capacity Building at the United Way of Greater Philadelphia and Southern New Jersey. And this is a role in which she is charged with developing and overseeing the organization's strategy to reduce intergenerational poverty by helping nonprofit partners enhance and sustain the impact they have on the community. Her previous experience includes serving as a program officer for the Barra Foundation, managing director of the Sustainable Business Network, which is where I first met her, and deputy director for community affairs for the Doe Fund. She also sits on the Selection Advisory Council for Green Light Fund Philadelphia and is a member of Philanthropy Network's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force and Impact 100. She was named one of Philadelphia's 101 Emerging Connectors by Leadership Philadelphia and one of 15 young Philadelphians shaping the city's philanthropy sector by Billy Penn. She's a graduate of the University of Delaware and also holds a Master of Public Administration from New York University. So moderating this really powerful panel of Philadelphians, that wasn't totally alliterative, but I liked it, is Niki Hawkins, who also moderated previous panel for us. And she is the Vice President of Community Engagement at WPVI-TV and 6ABC and a member of the Philabundance Board of Directors. She spent 14 years as a writer and producer and was then promoted to head up community affairs in 2014. She is also, like Loree, a Spelman College alumna. She currently serves on the Leadership Council, Nominating Committee, and Vice Chair of the Gala Committee for the United Negro College Fund Philadelphia and the Public Relations Committee for the Anti-Defamation League of Southeastern Pennsylvania, in addition to her service on the Philabundance Board. I am not going to hesitate. I'm going to turn this over to Niki and Loree and let the conversation begin, because these women are much more interesting than I am. So please, Niki, take it away.
Absolutely. Listen, Sara, thank you so much, and thank you so much for just your continued work at this important time with Philabundance, bringing in so many development dollars, right? Because we all know that food insecurity is top of mind. And again, we want to thank everybody for joining us today. These are some exceptional women, and as you can tell from their resumes, and starting with Loree, it's wonderful. This is, right, her virtual intro, her virtual, coming out, if you will, as CEO of Philabundance. And Loree, at this time, we commend you for starting during a global pandemic. We commend you for starting during civil and social unrest happening all around. So again, what's it like at this time for you to join as head of Philabundance?
Yeah, well, good afternoon, and thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you, Niki, for doing this, Sara, Laura, for helping to organize this, and to my friends, Kate and Cynthia, thanks for joining me for this important discussion. And to everybody who is watching and listening in, thank you for your interest and your support of Philabundance. We could not do this work without you. I could not be more pleased, honored, humbled to have the opportunity to take this on at this moment. I was excited to join Philabundance because, like all of you, I have watched Philabundance for years. I know it to be a solid organization who's delivered on its mission for 35 years, from the leadership of Pam Lawler, who founded it, to my predecessor, Glenn Bergman, to all the staff and supporters. Philabundance has been able to provide much needed food to families across the region who need it, and has done it in a dignified way for decades. I also, in addition to the work Philabundance has done to provide food to people, I was drawn to Philabundance because of its commitment to end hunger for good. One of the things you'll see, Sara talked about my commitment to public service. I'm a bit of an idealist, and I believe that we can definitely address people's needs now, but also address the root causes of the issues, and together can make a difference. And so Philabundance had already said that we're going to work to end hunger for good by partnering with folks like the people who are joining us today. I also was interested in Philabundance because we're operating as a region. We're going to talk today specifically about the work inside the city of Philadelphia, but as folks at United Way will tell us, we know that these problems don't end just at the borders of Philadelphia County. And so to have the ability to work across the region in New Jersey and the southeastern Pennsylvania counties, that was another reason I was really drawn to this work. So I'll take a moment to say a little bit about me. We talked about service. You'll hear that a lot when I talk about the work that I do. I moved by a quote by Marian Wright Edelman: "Service is the rent we pay for living." And so if I talk a little bit about my career, I've had the ability to serve the citizens of Philadelphia in 2 cabinet positions, where we really were using data and community engagement to serve citizens better. And we worked on safety and neighborhood blight and children and social services to improve the lives of Philadelphians. I also served in education on the nonprofit side and in the school district. At the nonprofit city year, really bringing ideals into the community, into the classrooms to support teachers and children in a data-driven and results-proven approach. And then with the school district, working with parents and working with advocates, working to bring more resources into classroom for teachers and students. I'm really proud of that work. And even in higher ed, where I just was, our work there was really about increasing access for people of all backgrounds, ensuring that everyday folks who maybe didn't have an access to education, which we know is a key out of poverty, being able to work on that. And just interestingly, in terms of a connection, Philabundance helped Rutgers-Camden start its food pantry. And that's one of the projects I worked on when I was there as well. And all along throughout that, I volunteered for nonprofits and foundations in the city who've really been the quiet champions of this work. So these organizations have inspired leaders, folks like the folks at the Philadelphia Foundation and Pedro Ramos, at the Independence Foundation, Philadelphia Health Partnership, Project Home. In many ways, folks have attacked these problems from various sides in innovative ways and really partnered to do that. And so that's part of who I am and what I bring to this work. And again, I am just honored to be able to join the folks at Philabundance, our supporters, our partners on the call today, to ensure that people have healthy food.
Absolutely amazing, Loree. Such an impressive resume. I think what you said, as you are like the ultimate idealist, I think that is so true on so many words. You are a friend, a Spelman sister for many years. I'd love to say 3 things about you. I know you to be fiercely brilliant, always studying and researching, bringing solutions to the table, right? Information and solutions, which is what we need in leadership today. You care about people. You truly care about people and you care about community. I think that's evident with the resume. And as we're going to be talking about synergy today, you are a master connector. So not just a connector, you are a master connector, finding ways to bring people together for the common good. And I'll go round robin to managing director to also echo some themes about Loree.
Well, in addition, I would echo everything that Niki said, but I also think in this moment, in addition to being brilliant and wise, Loree is known to be very level-headed and calm and collected. When I think about who we need, it's not only somebody with incredible experience, network, and resources, but also somebody who can keep calm in the face of this crisis. And we're so grateful, Loree, that you've stepped in at this time.
Excellent, excellent. Deputy Mayor.
So I just want to agree with Niki that Loree's energy and relationships is infectious. She has the ability to just bring you in, and I think more critical than just the label of being a connector, I think what both in my city relationship and Philabundance relationship, and then Loree in that common thread, is the ability to capture deep and meaningful relationships built on trust and emphasizing solutions, which is what we're going to talk about later today. So I couldn't have been more thrilled when she was announced, because you may have heard there's a lot of intersections. I feel like I've walked alongside of Loree in her career path, but also just, in addition to being brilliant, her ability to hold on to meaningful relationships and continue to make those work to access the common good in Philadelphia and in the region, I think emphasizes her leadership, and Philabundance is very fortunate to have her.
Excellent, beautiful on that note. And we hope that this kind of gave all of you a little bit more of an insight to the new leader over at Philabundance. And of course, we are going through a tough time. We're now discussing relationships, right? So Loree, if we want to start off, let's talk and hear more about how Philabundance and all of our partners are responding to COVID-19.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I'll share with folks that collaboration is a core value at Philabundance. We have it on our walls, we have it on our business card. So we know that we can't do it alone. And so when we think about what we've done even during COVID, we could not have moved 13 million pounds of food from March through now without partnerships. And so whenever we talk about the we, please know that we includes the folks that are watching and listening on this call who've supported us in a variety of ways, includes Kate at the United Way, includes Cynthia at the city, and all of their partners as well. And so without them, well, here's what we would not have been able to do. Without that kind of support, we would not have been able to provide so many more millions of pounds of food to people, so many more thousands of meals that we're able to provide to people in city shelters across the city during COVID. We would not have been able to invest in the agencies. We partner with hundreds of agencies across the city. We were able to buy them, because of this support, refrigerated trucks and refrigerated vans to ensure that people were getting food that they need. You'll hear Cynthia talk later about the way that we partnered with the city and another agency to support 40 brand new distribution sites, ensuring that people had fresh produce every week. I think through that, we brought through like 80,000 pounds of produce. I think we put through that. And we would not have been able to do that work without that partnership and sometimes the direction of the city really taking their lead. In addition to supporting those distribution sites through the partnership, we also were able to provide a truck-to-trunk contactless way for folks to access food. So on a weekly basis, folks could come by, get produce, get dry goods, get a couple of gallons of milk. And the city helped us in a number of ways, including providing safety and support and logistical guidance as well. And so I think it's evident that we all are seeing an increased need. We're all seeing that it's harder to access food, it's more expensive. And so as we saw more people that needed it, we really had to think about ways of working together. I also want to note that the United Way, which has been a longstanding supporter of ours, just was really incredibly generous. So clearly the financial support, and I'm hoping that Kate will share with us a little bit more about the COVID fund that she worked on with the city and the United Way and the Philadelphia Foundation. But also as a longtime supporter of ours, they were proactively extended a grant. So we have multi-year grants from them. They were able to say, like, we're able to provide that funding for an additional year, which, as we're seeing with philanthropy across the country, is really a best practice of thinking about how do we get more operating dollars to folks to allow the staff to focus on the hard work and the operations of what they're doing every day. And so that was incredibly supportive as well. So we really could not serve the people that we do and meet this increased need without partners like the United Way and the City of Philadelphia.
That's excellent. That's excellent. And in the light of synergy and partnerships, I'll hand it off to Deputy Mayor Cynthia. If you want to talk about how the city has partnered with Philabundance to meet the need.
Yeah, so it's a great story, and if any of you have heard it before, I'll try to keep it brief. But I think what was so telling about where we ended up in this process was it was really Philabundance and another partner in the city that was on a call with the city and said, you know what, we're in unprecedented times. We need to think very differently. We need to not work independently, and we really need the city to help centralize a focus. And so we, within a very, very short period of time, stood up these 40 independent sites. And what we knew was going to be critically important to the citizens was that there had to be consistency. So we had to be able to tell people specific days, specific times, specific locations. And it was just seamless with Philabundance. And I think talking through every element, and everybody brought their expertise. So one of the things the city had to do to help both Philabundance and our other organization was we didn't have the logistical expertise that Philabundance brought to the table, but we needed to help in the centralization process. So they were actually the technical assistants to the city, and anybody who's worked with government knows that the city's ability to take its guard down and to sort of turn over the responsibilities to help be guided through a process, I think was really incredible. And I'm twice a week on the phone with Loree's team, who are just phenomenal, thoughtful, reflective, and constantly thinking about how do we improve what the quality experience is like for the person who is actually picking up the boxes. So the actual boxes of food that we delivered throughout the city of Philadelphia, we've done over 500,000 boxes in the period of time. And the partnership has also created a very different level of relationship between the city and Philabundance. And I don't want to. I want to give some time to Kate and just say that it's also really changed how the city looks at food insecurity. And so I think the constant demands and the idealism that Loree and her leadership, but Philabundance itself as an organization has put at the forefront is that access to food easily available access, and fresh, healthy options are so critical to families in Philadelphia.
I think that's excellent, Cynthia. The idea that you said you're changing your thought during COVID response, not thinking independently. We really do need to come together, right? Because, you know, and the whole, it's very astute that you said operations, you know, maybe not. Philabundance, quite fantastic at doing that. So as we head to managing director over at the United Way, Kate Hudson, let's also talk about the synergy that you've had with Philabundance through this time of the COVID-19 response.
Absolutely. As described, I manage capacity building for United Way, and there was a once dormant corner of my work was in emergency response, and we always say we're always ready. You know, should we need to be activated, we'll jump in. And it's sort of a theme of, I'm sure my remarks today will be how unprecedented COVID-19 actually was. There was not a playbook really for anyone, but certainly not for philanthropy. We had some of the best experts in the world, frankly, and McKinsey and Company had been providing pro bono infrastructure to us. We had access to incredible knowledge and resources. And this again, COVID-19 was unprecedented. So I'll share a little bit about the role that Philabundance played in that, but just as a little bit of background on the PHL COVID-19 Fund. On March 19th, United Way of Greater Philadelphia and Southern New Jersey, in partnership with Philadelphia Foundation and the City of Philadelphia, stood up a Rapid Relief Fund, which from March 19th until June 30th had raised and deployed $17.5 million across 10 counties to just over almost 550 organizations. That work was intended to reach vulnerable groups and people who were disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, which is sort of gets back to my point before about unprecedented. If you're looking at crisis response, you know, for storms and other types of crises that we have a number of playbooks for, where a particular geography is hard hit, and you can imagine who's going to be hard hit within that. COVID-19, the virus itself, impacted different groups of people harder than it did others. So our definition of vulnerable groups, Philadelphia Foundation's definition of vulnerable groups, United Way's definition of vulnerable groups, everything needed to be thrown out, and we needed to start over and think more about how is the virus hitting people in addition to what we know about disproportionately impacted communities, you know, in general. So where did we go for information? You know, we had the Center for Disaster Philanthropy, which is always a good guidebook, has an excellent playbook. The Center for High Impact Philanthropy at Penn, as I referenced, McKinsey and Company provided some good infrastructure to us. But I would say, without a doubt, 2 phone calls did more to inform my sort of strategy setting for that fund than anything that followed or anything that preceded it. And one was a call with Philabundance, and one was a call with Women Against Abuse. And the reason these 2 calls were so important, intersecting, is just congregate living at Women Against Abuse, domestic violence related to women against abuse, and then also their contact center information, accurate information and safety became really important. How would those contact centers be impacted? And from Philabundance's perspective, what was incredible was that Philabundance had a national network. So you all had already spoken to Washington. You knew what was going on in other parts of the country and how that was going to affect our food supply and access in ways that other folks on the ground here just didn't know what to prepare for. I'll pause there. There's a lot more to share about that, but I mean that genuinely, that we really were starting from scratch and we were moving very, very quickly. And we knew that Philabundance and food banks in general, because of the way that they do their work in those established networks, you can't build trust overnight. So when you need to move fast, you need partners who already have long trusting relationships in communities. So we knew if we invested in Philabundance, we were also going to be able to reach many more communities that did prove to be really desperately vulnerable in the weeks ahead.
Kate, thank you so much. And I really appreciate that you bring out the idea of trust when it comes to building partnerships, right? And working with those that have established networks so that during these unprecedented times, everybody can get up and go, right? And so I think that's so important as we discuss all of the different ways that people can partner together and are going to have to partner together. So what's interesting is as we move to the lessons learned, right? As we moved, what have you learned through this process? It's already very clear with partnerships and synergy that hopefully will last even after this. But tell us a little bit about some of the lessons that each of you in your individual sectors have learned during COVID-19. Loree, I'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really love that you've brought up that concept of trust, Kate, and that even in part of what you said, Cynthia, I'm hearing humility, right? The kind of part of what we have to do is kind of put the egos aside, put the kind of old way of thinking aside, and say how we're working together. So I definitely heard that loud and clear and appreciate that. So lots of lessons. We're learning lots of lessons. First, that the team is awesome, right? So I came June 2nd. The folks at Philabundance have been doing this work for months, and they are incredible what they were able to do, responding to ever-changing conditions. And then with team, I have to include the folks that are here, right? So the team clearly, including what the work with Cynthia and her team at the city, with Kate and her team, with the other funders, that kind of what the folks were able to do, as Kate said, unprecedented times in record time, gathering information, responding quickly, and then changing and adjusting that. Like, that was incredible. So learning how incredible the teams were and that people were able to respond so quickly. The other thing that I think we've all learned is that the systems were broken, right? And I say that and pause there. And the systems were broken, and there's probably a better way to help people. And so what I'm hoping comes out of this, and we'll talk a little bit later about what's next, I have to stop and give the example. I guess a week or two in, I went out and supported one of our agencies and delivered and volunteered to deliver senior boxes. I was down the street from where my brother lives. So kind of one of the lessons is, no matter where you are in the city, no matter who you think it is, maybe your neighbor needs some help. So I'm carrying these boxes about 30 pounds. I think I'm fit. It's a little bit heavy for me. When I think about how I help my mom with her groceries, I realize that my mom, who would be in that category, is not really going to be able to go to a site and pick up and bring those boxes. So one of the lessons is maybe we should ensure that seniors get their food delivered differently in the future, as opposed to having them come up on public transit, et cetera. So that's definitely a lesson learned. The other part of that, in terms of the systems maybe not working so well, is that we understand why paperwork's required. We want to make sure everything's on the up and up and kind of ethically, and there's accountability. But folks were able to be a little bit more flexible. Government was able to be a little bit more flexible. So let's think differently about what paperwork we're requiring. Because think about it, folks are already in a somewhat humiliating position already to come and ask for help and charity, and then we're kind of adding these burdens. So systems aren't broken, are not working well, they're broken. How can we learn from that? And the final is really the importance of government. We know that as an emergency food relief agency that we can do some portion of the need, but we can't do it alone. So what's our team were able to do by saying, okay, we're going to focus the attention, use the megaphone that the city has to let people know where services are. We can't operate on our own without partnering with agencies of the scope and size of United Way and the heft of city government. We also know that to solve these kind of intractable problems, we need to make policy changes. So Cynthia's talked about kind of a food policy council, whatever she's doing, we're going to be right there with her. We're also being partnering with people across this region and across the country. Just this past week, we're calling for an increase in SNAP, the nutrition program that honestly, first and foremost, gets more dollars in businesses, right? As well as allows our neighbors a little bit of money to have the choice to decide what they're putting on, what food they're putting on their families' tables. So definitely, I think government at every level is another, like, just understanding how important that is was another lesson that we learned.
Yeah, amazing lessons learned, and just the idea of just a small tweak, bringing food to seniors. Just these small tweaks, right? I think we can all be clear that COVID-19 has exposed so many inequities in our society on so many different levels, and food insecurity, right? And so Cynthia, and again with congratulations on your assignment as deputy mayor of a whole new department, right? Children and families. When we talk sometimes about government being a little bit broken, your probably role burst out of that need, right? And so as we're discussing lessons learned,
Yeah.
with children and families and working with food insecurity and Philabundance, if you want to chime in on that as well.
Sure. I mean, one of those amazing and sort of timing is everything, right? To have this office happen at a time, and it also was linked to the partnership with the school district. So the meal distribution process came out of a product of figuring out how we were going to feed kids when they weren't in school. And it was quickly within that moment that we're like the general because we had general population showing up at school sites saying, well, where do we get our food? And again, back to the collaboration of the natural relationship with Philabundance to have that conversation and move to centralization. I hope I get to talk later about food insecurity and the impact this has had on the city, but I did want to I wanted to echo on a few things that Loree said that really stuck out for me, which is not an easy thing for government, which is from a practice standpoint, we never set ground rules, you know, as partners, but the leaving the ego at the door was huge, and that's not an easy thing for government to do. And we let the community was absolutely at the forefront. And the need to ensure that people were fed was always at the top. And so that meant when we had to have very difficult conversations, because there were a few times where the produce wasn't great, was the ability to have that conversation and then self-correct. So we were the adaptability of constantly making corrections in real time, and committing to that level of communication was important. So I think the benefits of the lessons learned that I wanted to share from the city's perspective was we used the strengths of everybody who came to the table. So the city played a huge role around the communications and being like the megaphone for this initiative. We also learned that the community doesn't say, oh, this provider does this on this day and this provider does that on another. The consistency for the community of where you can get food, that's what was most important. And using existing infrastructure. And then, you know, like I said, we'll get to this later in terms of what it has meant for the Office of Children and Families, but food is food. It's a basic need, and that people don't care what package, what box, or whom is there, but how important it became for the city of Philadelphia and what critical role all the partners played in that, I think was a tremendous lesson learned, and a different posture I think the city is going to take moving forward around food insecurity. But I think that I think it's been a quietly veiled thing that we've been referencing, but leadership, relationships, and the focus on the solving the problem, I think helped and continues to help move this work forward.
Excellent. It's a lot, right? We learned a lot from ourselves, and what being responsive. I heard adaptability, being responsive to the needs of the community, and then finding all the strengths to come together to actually make that push and actually make a difference. So that's fantastic, Cynthia. And Kate Houstoun, the philanthropic side. So if you want to talk about the lessons that you've learned, we at 6ABC in the early days we were happy to help promote the PHL COVID Fund in a big way. Our prime time anchor, 6 p.m. anchor, Jim Gardner, gave $25,000 to the effort. And but with the philanthropic side, I'm sure there were even lessons learned. We heard you talk about it just a little bit more, that there could have been some line items missing as far as real community need. And food insecurity is one of them.
That's great. Yeah, and we the Gardner bump was real. We saw that and very much appreciated it. Yeah, I just, you know, it's funny not even knowing what Cynthia would say about lessons learned. Iteration was probably the word I would have used. So you're moving really fast. So just to getting back on, you know, on March 17th, Philadelphia Foundation and United Way hadn't even agreed to work together on this yet. We both knew we wanted to lend all that we had to do something, but maybe United Way would be in recovery and Philadelphia Foundation would be in relief. And on March 19th, we launched together. So we were moving very, very fast. And with that, we needed to, I think you said humility, we humbled ourselves considerably about how it would not be perfect to start, and we needed to be improving as we went. we had really ambitious goals related to equity. That was something we wanted to state up front. And it was kind of TBD how that would play out when so many of the dimensions of this virus were different from the missions, practices, and grant making of the two institutions that were coming together, not to mention having the role and partnership of the city of Philadelphia too. So we put that on the website. We wanted to do equitable work, and that was an area where we really had to stay focused on it and improve as we went. So I'll just give you three quick examples. We made a very simple application. We were very deliberate. We wanted just about anybody to be able to submit this application, whether they had submitted an application to a foundation before or not. And the trade-off in that was that we weren't collecting a lot of information. We didn't have as much demographic information about who was served by those organizations. We didn't have leadership diversity information about the organization itself. We made some very good bets in round one in a lot of food banks, but then needed to do a lot of supplemental work to understand, to make really good decisions about those resources for future rounds. And that happened a lot with a squadron of volunteers, including a number of staff of regional foundations that I imagine a couple of them may be on the call today, the McKinsey & Company pro bono support as well, so that we could make more intelligent decisions for the rounds going forward. We also, it's just an interesting point around demographic information, asking clients, food banks and a lot of the groups we were working with don't ask for demographic information. They don't ask for any information. So we had to be okay. Initially, we had to be okay with not having that information. And then later, as we learned that undocumented people wouldn't be served by the CARES Act, we were thrilled that nobody was asking for that information when people needed food or supplies or other types of assistance, because we knew those organizations had a history working with people who might be uncomfortable presenting identification. So it was just sort of an interesting way that our kind of paradigm or thinking about demographic information shifted over the course of the work. And the last thing was just around leadership diversity, nonprofit leadership diversity. As I said before, we were really interested in groups that were particularly vulnerable. That included seniors living in congregant living, that included food-based organizations that were doing food access. And at least in the initial applications, there wasn't a lot of leadership diversity among those nonprofit organizations. So that was an interesting take. Like if you spread out across the entire nonprofit sector, you might see it's quite diverse in terms of its leadership. But when it came to food access and the senior serving organizations, we saw less of that. So that was those were some challenges that we had along the way in order to sort of really meet those equity goals that we set for ourselves at the start.
It's a lot of lessons learned through all of this, and I think that's important to. I heard you say equity in a lot of ways, and trying to figure out exactly where the need was the greatest, right? And I think that's tremendously important and great to be able to continue to figure out ways to spread it around, if you will. I think that's tremendous, all the different nonprofits that were served in that effort. And let us all be real, food insecurity was an issue before COVID. It is an issue during COVID-19. This virus is staying with us. And we're here for the long term. And as we continue to talk about partnerships, let's again talk about how we're gonna all meet the need, if you will, for this next phase. What are some, and we're on the call with some wonderful donors, some wonderful foundations, some wonderful just giving hearts, if you will. So let's talk a little bit about what we all need moving forward to feed, if you will, everyone in food that's food insecure. Loree?
Yeah, I'm actually going to ask Cynthia and Kate to go first, and I'll answer that question last if it's okay.
Sure, I'm happy to, because I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think government, as Loree said, plays a role in philanthropy is so critical. So one of the other things I applaud the COVID Fund and the United Way and all of those donors was recognizing that one time wasn't enough. And so for those of you who are listening now, I think there's a few things I want to say. One is that, as Niki so well pointed out, Philadelphia is a food insecure city. It was before COVID, and COVID exacerbated that. The stats are very clear. 35% of children in Philadelphia live in poverty. We know that the free and reduced lunch is across the board in our schools because we're at like a 96% acceptance rate. So when you think about that before a huge pandemic that has had tremendous financial implications, that food was an issue, that it has really changed my thinking about how we invest in supports around food, because I said this to Loree, Niki, and it's like, I'm guarantee you, since this call happened after 1, I mean, I know I ate breakfast today and I ate lunch, and I did not for one moment question where that was coming from, or that I had options. My kids had options. I packed my son's lunch today. Families can't do that and don't have access to that. So I would say when you're thinking about this from a philanthropic standpoint, food happens every day. It's not a monthly thing. It's not an annual thing. It is something that a huge number of Philadelphians every day struggle to figure out what choice are they going to make. So everybody should think about food access in a very different way, because the food insecurity issue is not going away, and Philabundance and other folks who are serving the needs around food access, it is a basic need. And I know we throw that terminology around so easily, but it is at its core survivability. And our ability to feed the public is at the utmost when we think about equity, and if we're going to put sort of literally our money where our mouths are. So in where I stand, like just thinking about how we push that from a government standpoint, but also how we ask philanthropy to think much more creatively around their giving, and how they view basic needs and food insecurity as a priority in their philanthropic dollars.
Excellent. Drove that home very well, Cynthia. You drove that home very well. Very articulate. Thank you for that. And Kate, your thoughts on?
Yeah, I mean, I take a kind of a capacity building lens on this, and it's just how do we help build more resilient organizations, food and well beyond, and that goes, into the next 12 months and well beyond that. How can we be better prepared next time, God forbid? And how can we fundamentally change our relationship to the nonprofits that we in philanthropy serve? I just want to sort of hold on to some of those experiences that we had along the way, where that humility, like Loree said, where we really, that is how we should feel all the time about our investments, about who knows best about what's going on in community. I think some of the sort of technical and tactical things we're doing at United Way, we're completely rethinking capacity building, which was kind of a thing that you would apply for. Maybe Loree would get an email or Sara would get an email, and in 4 weeks you could apply and then maybe do a 2-year program. We're really thinking about it more in terms of making it on demand, and thinking about what are the specific technical assistance needs that organizations have in this moment. Really just going back to the drawing board and making sure that we're providing what they need. And some of that is really obvious, like continuity planning. I'm not sure many of the organizations that we've worked with historically, Philadelphia Foundation, United Way, were as prepared as they could have been. And the same goes for business. This isn't about nonprofits. But continuity planning, obviously technical assistance around virtual transformation and their ability to do more of their work virtually. Financial management, I mean, just the cash flow nightmare of this work has been, unlike anything they'd seen before. Also, trauma-informed care. We have found that our organizations that have been participating and really working on their trauma-informed cultures, we believe, we're not evaluating it, but we believe we're more resilient in this time and their ability to respond not only to their clients' needs, but also to their staff, because this came into the organizations. This was traumatic to the people on the front lines as much as it was to the clients themselves. And then very obviously around race equity, we really need to think about how we can support organizations that have known, but now know more than ever that they need to evaluate their own cultures and policies in order to become more inclusive places. And I just, I think sometimes we think about maybe food or a service or a bed, as a service and not as a resource or an asset. But I just encourage nonprofits to really think about the deployment of resources as an exercise in equity. Just like a funder should be thinking about dollars equitably, we should be thinking about food, just echoing some of the comments that Cynthia made before. So what's the how, and how can United Way be a place where organizations can turn to help sort of move along that continuum to become more resilient organizations?
Yes, equity for all. Loree?
Yeah. So yeah, jumping in, I'm glad that Dick also, had that framing as well. So, in terms of what's next for us, it's more of a lot of stuff, right? So one is more food, right? So we see ourselves partnering with organizations, with our agencies, with the city, with funders to just continue to bring more fresh, healthy food out to the people, our neighbors that need it. And that's going to be meals as well as kind of fresh produce, dry goods. So we're going to do more of that, because like everybody's saying, we're all expecting that. We've not seen the last of COVID, that there could be another surge in the fall. We know that next week that unemployment is kind of ending, that kind of next round of support is ending for folks. We know that the rent forgiveness is, that's coming to an end as well. So we're expecting this economic crisis to deepen. And so we're operating at the heightened level. As that goes up, we anticipate just bringing more food through the system to provide more families with the food that they need to feed their families. To do that, we also just need more funds, right? So we have Sara and her team are working tirelessly and we are incredibly fortunate that we've got individual donors, philanthropic partners, locally, regionally, nationally. We're working with VA America on that. And so we're working to ensure that we get the dollars that we need, and also just additional in-kind support. So when folks have food to donate like that, the more kind of fundraising is also what is coming up, what's next for us. In addition to that, more advocacy. Talked some here about, we're a part of the solution, but not the full part of the solution. So we definitely are partnering with government officials, elected officials at every level to address these more systematic issues and more partnership. So, when Cynthia says, like, we're going to convene people talk about food policy, like, we'll be there. And I see there's even a question in the chat from another nonprofit leader. Like, I think you're going to have us all showing up, and I know Kate's going to support us on the capacity building side, right? Like to say, how are we going to come together to solve these problems? So I anticipate that there's going to be more food that we're going to have to get through to provide to our neighbors that need it, more advocacy, more partnership. And I definitely, love, Kate, that you mentioned equity. This is something that we're all really, have a renewed interest in. And so part of what that looks like for us is putting the people we serve first. Right. So let's make sure, and one of the things you'll be seeing out of us is like, we want to make sure that all the work that we're doing is in fact meeting the needs of the families and the individuals. So that's putting them at the center of this. It's ensuring we're doing it in an equitable way, ensuring we're doing it in a dignified way, and kind of having them at the table to drive the work that we do.
Important. And the work keeps going in a very big, robust, combined, synergized way, right? And the point is we still need the donations, right? We still need to look at giving in a different way. Do you think that, and I'll just throw this out before we start to open it up to questions, so please everybody send your questions in on the Q&A tab. What are those, just a barrage of just some of those short-term needs that are going to turn into long-term needs? Clearly it's the donations, but what are some of those other types of investments that we need to think about when it comes to equity, when it comes to diversity, when it comes to meeting the need for this, if anyone wants to?
Yeah, I wanted to just note that in the recovery phase of any disaster, this is where fundraising gets hard and expensive. And if an organization's able to get itself some earned media at the beginning of a disaster, as Philabundance did repeatedly, you're probably in good shape. People who care are gonna see you and turn in your direction. It's not to say that it's easy, not to diminish how much work goes into it, but this part does get hard. And it's, you know, I joke that sometimes I think donors and maybe more so even foundations have an allergy to supporting the same organization more than once in a year. This is the year to do it. This is, you know, with a couple of really notable exceptions. For the most part, foundations, you know, are still sort of thinking about their 5% in a different way, but this is the rainy day. This is the moment to stretch, to sort of change things up and support organizations differently. I noted a question in the Q&A about general operating support, and I just want to echo just how important that was. I think Loree mentioned this early on. I'm glad to join. United Way was already a general operating support organization. We provided grants that are targeted in the sense that we wanted food access to go to particular geographies, but it's unrestricted support over multiple years, and how important that cash flow is to organizations when these crises come along. But then for recovery, it's just as important that an organization has that fluidity and horizon on their funding to know that that money is going to be there for an additional year and ideally multiple additional years. You know, for folks who might have access to donor advised funds, to philanthropies, relationships with foundations like this, I really urge us all to, again, just think totally differently and stretch in ways that might be outside of the culture or policies of an organization that you're a funder that you're involved with.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. There is a question for Cynthia, asking what the city's long-term plan for addressing food in the food insecurity crisis is, and the strengthening the existing safety net programs beyond philanthropic giving. Cynthia?
Yep. So one of the things we've been actually talking about with Philabundance and our other partner is how do we leave the food system in a better place than when we entered into the COVID pandemic? And so we actually are looking at the lessons learned and the strengths from the 40 sites to talk about how do we continue elements of that going forward. And we are having a conversation because the way the federal funding is set up around how city government can play a greater role in food access. And it has never had a senior level voice at the table. And so I definitely think that one of the things my office has done is really taken on food and food insecurity. And so it's now become a cabinet level priority for us. And so we're just trying to figure out how the city then responds from the government standpoint, but how do we then stand up and support Philabundance and other programs. I did see there was also a reference around youth. So Niki, if it's okay that I talked about the Philly schools. So here's another thing that I know more about food than I ever thought I was going to, or USDA waivers or what have you. So I am very close and work very, like I do with Philabundance, the food service team at the school district. And so we've been using their infrastructure, and we are planning for next year. We're planning both for families who may choose to do virtual, as well as the alternating schedule that's been introduced. So there is significant planning underway between the city and the school district, and our office is playing a lead role in that. So there's definitely a lot of conversation in that area with the district.
As we know, the reopening plan for schools is just so important on so many different levels, not even just around safety and the coronavirus, but around the meal plan, food insecurity, kids traveling to and from. Yep. I mean, there is a lot going on. Thank you for that forward-thinking idea of what it looks like while we're presently in COVID and what it could look like as we move forward. And that's really exciting to hear that food insecurity and a focus on that is going to be paid in city government. And as we have the three entities here, I know I brought, and before we end, if there's not many other questions, I brought up the idea of the private sector, right? So we have city government represented nonprofit with an amazing operational scope of 9 counties delivering food, and we have Kate on the philanthropic side. So so what's a word how do we get more of the private sector involved? I think Kate hit a little bit on it with some of the foundational dollars, and hey, giving for multiple years because food insecurity is a basic need, but there's probably also a continued room for public-private partnership. Yes?
Yeah, and I'll jump in and say among the things that was great about the PHL COVID fund is that so many people gave. So you had individual people that were giving, you had companies that gave that maybe hadn't given in a philanthropic way before, and really have to celebrate the city's leadership in that. So I think that we've talked a little bit earlier about how important it is to have somebody in the deputy mayor role like Cynthia who's leading this up, but to have the city as a convener, as a city as the kind of megaphone. And so when you have the city, you have the mayor calling and saying, hey, this is important to the citizens, different companies, more individuals and companies came out and supported than probably would have otherwise. And so I think, and I think Kate can speak more to that. So we have seen, companies step up. I would say for us, we are incredibly fortunate that we have such a variety of folks that give. So there are everyday donors that give, $5 a month. We have companies that support us with in-kind donations and volunteers and send dollars in. But you're absolutely right. Like we've talked about the need for partnerships, right? And clearly the private sector is a key part of that. I would say, Kate, if you have anything to add to that.
Absolutely. And even on the media side, the continuous focus on also, along with the city being a megaphone, right?
Yeah. I should, and before Kate answers, I will say that, and Kate referenced this as well. And obviously just, Niki, having you and your station involved, and Kate talked about, we've had great organizations that have stepped up and said, oh, we'll help you with the PSA, we'll help you with some digital billboards. And that has gone a long way. We could not do this work. We frankly, rather than spending the money on that media, we're able to spend the money on food. So it is true that, people talk about taking a village, right? It really is true that for this crisis, the village has really circled and come together to support folks in needs any way that they could. $1 here, it's media there, and that's incredibly helpful.
Right, I think that's what it's about. I know 6ABC for over 30 years has done a food drive in benefit of Philabundance through, it starts with our Thanksgiving Day parade and goes through the holidays, and so many sponsors, right? So many, corporate sponsors it's a basic need. And I think will most likely only increase, if you will, in that regard. But as it does, it absolutely takes a village. I know we're running a little bit short on time, and I'll hand it back over to Sara, but I just have to say, Cynthia Figueroa, Deputy Mayor of the new Office of Children and Families with the City of Philadelphia. Thank you, Kate Houstoun, Managing Director of Capacity Building with the United Way of Greater Philadelphia and Southern New Jersey, and Miss Loree D. Jones, Chief Executive Officer of Philabundance. Powerhouse ladies, so much experience and expertise. I can't think of just a better group of partners coming together to synergize and really find a way to help our community get through this most difficult time of a global pandemic. So more power to you, Godspeed, and we thank you, and to know that you're at the helm making such an important difference.
Thank you.
Thank you, Niki.
Sara?
Thank you, Niki. I can't say it any better than Niki said it. That was really an amazing way to spend an hour. Thank you everyone else who also joined us. Let me extend our thanks on behalf of everyone who was with us today. This was actually a record-breaking attendance for one of our town halls, and no doubt it was due to the power of the group that you heard from today. So thank you, particularly Niki, Cynthia, and Kate, for giving so generously of your time, your most precious resource, and your expertise to us. We really value the partnerships we have with you. This town hall will be made available for later viewing. Please feel free to share it with others you think might be interested. If we didn't get to your questions, we will respond to you offline. to try and answer any questions that we didn't get to. I think there might be two. But I think one of the things you heard really, really clearly, and it's my job to say it again, the need is not diminishing. It's just not diminishing at all. So please continue to support our work in spirit and tangibly when and as you can. And thank you again, and may your plates always be full. Thank you.